Some things are not normal. By that, I mean if you go out in the world and start measuring things like human height, IQ, or the size of apples on a tree, you will find that for each of these things, most of the data clusters around some average value. This is so common that we call it the normal distribution. But some things in life are not like this.
Nature shows power laws all over the place. That seems weird. Like, is nature tuning itself to criticality?
If you make a crude measure of how big is a world war by how many people it kills, you find that it follows a power law. The outcome will vary in size over 10 million, 100 million.
It's much more likelihood of really big events than you would expect from a normal distribution. And they will totally skew the average.
The system you're looking at doesn't have any inherent physical scale. It's really hard to know what's going to happen next.
The more you measure, the bigger the average is, which is really weird. It sounds impossible.
It's very important to try to understand, which game you're playing and what are the payoffs going to be in the long run.
In the late 1800s, Italian engineer Vilfredo Pareto stumbled upon something no one had seen before. See, he suspected there might be...
This guy looks... is this a drawing? He has no ridges. He is smooth.
Pareto stumbled upon something no one had seen before. See, he suspected there might be a hidden pattern in how much money people make. So he gathered income tax records from Italy, England, France, and other European countries, and for each country, he plotted the distribution of income. Each country he looked at, he saw the same pattern, a pattern which still holds in most countries to this day. And it's not a normal distribution. If you think about a normal distribution like height, there's a clearly defined average, and extreme outliers basically never happen. I mean, you're never going to find someone who is, say, 5 times the average height. That would be physically impossible. But Pareto's income distributions were different. Take this curve for England. It shows the number of people who earn more than a certain income. The curve starts off declining steeply, most people earn relatively little, but then it falls away gradually, much more slowly than a normal distribution would, and it spans several orders of magnitude. There were people who earned 5 times, 10 times, even 100 times more than others. That kind of spread...
Hold on. Yeah, all right.
Would, and it spans several orders of magnitude. There were people who earned 5 times, 10 times, even 100 times more than others. That kind of spread just wouldn't happen if income were normally distributed. Now, to shrink this huge spread of data, Pareto calculated the logarithms of all the values and plotted those instead. In other words, he used a log-log plot. And when he did that, the broad curve transformed into a straight line. The gradient was around -1.5. That means each time you double the income, say from 200 pounds to 400 pounds, the number of people earning at least that amount drops off by a factor of 2 to the power of 1.5, which is around 2.8. And this pattern holds for every doubling of income. So Pareto could describe the distribution of incomes with one simple equation. The number of people who earn an income greater than or equal to X is proportional to 1 over X to the power of 1.5. Now, that's what Pareto saw for England, but he performed the same analysis on data from Italy, France, Prussia, and a bunch of other countries. And he saw the same thing, again and again. Each time, the data transformed into a straight line, and the gradients were remarkably similar. That meant Pareto could describe the income distribution in each country with the same equation, 1 over the income to some power, where that power is just the absolute gradient of the logarithmic graph. This type of relationship is called a power law. When you move from the world of normal distributions to the world of power laws, things change dramatically.
I understand.
So to illustrate this, let's take a trip to the casino to play 3 different games. At table number 1, you get 100 tosses of a coin. Each time you flip and it lands on heads, you win.
Because you can change the data around and it's a circumstance, whatever. But overall, you're gonna have the same form of a power distribution if you were to dumb it down to one equation. Real shit.
$1. So the question is, how much would you be prepared to pay to play this game? Well, we need to work out how much you'd expect to win in this game and then pay less than that expected value. So the probability of throwing a head is 1/2. Multiply that by $1 and multiply that by 100 tosses. That gives you an expected payout of $50. So
RDP.
you should be willing to pay anything less than $50 to play this game. Sure, you might not win every time, but if you play the game hundreds of times, the small variations either side of the average will cancel out, and you can expect to turn a profit. One of the first people to study this kind of problem was Abraham de Moivre in the early 1700s. He showed that if you plot the probability of each outcome, you get a bell-shaped curve, which was later coined the normal distribution.
Aha.
Normal distributions, the traditional explanation, is that when there are a lot of effects that are random, that are adding up, that's when you expect normals. So like how tall I am depends on a lot of random things about my nutrition, about my parents' genetics, all kinds of things. But if these random effects are additive, that is what tends to lead to normals.
Okay, I mean, that's fair enough.
At
What about
table
it,
number
though?
2, there's a slightly different game. You still get 100 tosses of the coin, but this time, instead of potentially winning $1 on each flip, your winnings are multiplied by some factor. So
Plinko.
you start out with $1, and then every time you toss a head, you multiply your winnings by 1.1. If
Plinko.
instead the coin lands on tails, you multiply your winnings by 0.9. And after 100 tosses, you take home the total. That is the dollar you started with times the string of 1.1s and 0.9s. So how much should you pay to play this game? Well,
None.
on each flip, your payout can either grow or shrink. And each is equally likely each time you toss the coin. So the expected factor each turn is just 1.1 plus 0.9 divided by 2, which is 1.
It's still 1, yeah.
So if you start out with $1, then your expected payout is
But
just
this
$1.
fucks you, though.
That means you should be willing to pay anything less than $1 to play this game,
Yeah, but deviations start to compound and you start getting fucked harder and harder.
right? Well, if you look at the distribution of payouts, you can see that you could win big. If you tossed 100 heads, you'd win 1.1 to the power of 100. That's almost $14,000. Although the chance of that happening is around 1 in 10 to the power of 30. You'd be more likely to win the lottery 3 times in a row. On the
In a
other
row.
hand, the median payout is around 61 cents. So if you're only playing the game one time and you want even odds of turning a profit, well then you should pay less than 61 cents. Though either way, if you played the game hundreds of times, your payout would average out to $1. Now watch what happens if we switch the x-axis from a linear scale to a logarithmic scale. Well then you see the curve transforms into a normal distribution. That's why this type of distribution is called a log normal distribution.
When random effects multiply, if I have a certain wealth, and then my wealth goes up by a certain percentage next year because of my investments, and then the year after that, it changes by another random factor. As opposed to adding, I'm multiplying year after year.
Guys,
If you have
it's
a
called log normal because it's a logarithmic normal distribution.
big product of random numbers, when you take the log of a product, that's the sum of the logs. So what was a product of random numbers then gets translated into sums of logs of random numbers. And that's what leads to this so-called log normal distribution. And log normal
Okay, I get that.
distributions produce big inequalities. You don't just see a mean, you see a mean with a big long tail. It's much more likelihood of really big events, in this case, tremendous wealth being obtained, than
Max
you would
win.
expect from a normal distribution.
The reason this curve is so asymmetric is because the downside is capped at 0. So at most you could lose $1. But the upside can keep growing up to nearly 4.
You can always win more. If you remember that you can always lose more. That's the thing, though.
$14,000. Now let's go on to table 3. Again, you'll be tossing a coin. But this time, you start out with $1 and the payout doubles each time you toss the coin. And you keep tossing until you get a heads. Then the game ends. So if you get heads on your first toss, you get $2. If you get a tails first and then hit a heads on your second toss, you get $4. If you flipped 2 tails and then a head on your third toss, you'd get $8, and so on. If it took you to the nth toss to get a heads, you would get 2 to the n dollars. So how much should you pay to play this game? Well, as in our previous example, we need to work out the
$1 only.
expected value. So suppose you throw a head on your first try. The payout is $2, and the probability of that outcome is 1/2. So the expected value of that toss
It'll be more
is
than $1, so you have to go in debt.
If it takes you 2 tosses to get a heads, then the payout is $4, and the probability
You would always all in automatically. You want to reduce this to as little equations as possible, which is just one
If
one
that
toss.
happening is
All
1
in.
over 4. So again, the expected value is $1. We also need to add in the chance that you flip heads on your third try. In that case, the payout is $8, and the probability of that happening is 1 over 8. So again, the expected value is $1. And we have to keep repeating this calculation over all possible outcomes. We have to keep adding $1 for each of the different options for flipping the coin, say 10 times until it lands on heads, or 100 times before you get heads. I know.
This is the martingale type thing. And let's say you say, oh, we're never gonna have a heads 50 times in a row, right? You calculate, you first start with $1, you double the $1, 50 times, you play with that amount. So basically, when you win, you only win $1, but you never have 50 in a row until it happens, but it doesn't.
It's extremely unlikely, but the payout is so huge that the expected value of that outcome is still $1. So it still increases the expected value of the whole game.
Scale.
This means that theoretically, the total expected value of this game is infinite. This is known as the St. Petersburg paradox. If you look at the distribution of payouts, you can see it's uncapped. It spans across all orders of magnitude. You could get a payout of $1,000, $100,000, or even $1 million or more. And while $1 million payout is unlikely, it's not that unlikely, it's around 1 in a million. Now, if you transform both axes to a log scale, you see a straight line with a gradient of -1. The payout of the St. Petersburg paradox follows a power law. The specific power law in this case is that the probability of a payout x is equal to x to the power of -1, or 1 over x.
That makes sense.
In the previous games, when you have a normal distribution or even a log normal distribution, you can measure the width of that distribution, its standard deviation. And in a normal distribution,
Calculus!
95% of the data fall within 2 standard deviations from the mean. But with a power law, like in the St. Petersburg paradox, there is no measurable width. The standard deviation is infinite. This makes power laws a fundamentally different beast with some very weird properties.
Imagine you take
because there's a break at the beginning and at the end, so the area is impossible to calculate, no?
bunch of random samples and then average them, and then take more random samples and average them. You'll find that the average keeps going up. It doesn't converge. And the more you measure, the bigger the average is, which is really weird. It sounds impossible, but it's because it has such a heavy tail, meaning the probability of really whopping big events is so significant that if you keep measuring, occasionally you're going to measure one of those extreme outliers, and they will totally skew the average. It's sort of like saying, if you're standing in a room with Bill Gates
Yeah,
or
the average
Elon Musk,
income.
the average wealth in that room,
I knew it was going to say that.
is going to be $100 billion or something.
I knew it was going to say that.
Because the average is dominated by one outlier.
And that same idea, one outlier can dominate the average, shows up online too. A handful of companies, servers, and data centers hold the personal information of millions of people. So when one of them gets hacked, it can have ripple effects across the whole network. We've had scammers get a hold. You get a power law from the simple 4 extra months free. So why do you get a power law from the simple St. Petersburg setup? If you look at the payout, x, you can see it grows exponentially with each toss of the coin, x equals 2 to the n. But if you look at the probability of tossing the coin that many times to get a heads, you can see that this probability shrinks exponentially. So the probability of flipping a coin n times is a half to the power of n.
I had it. That's literally martingale. I said that. That's literally what I was talking about.
But we're not really interested in the number of tosses, we're interested in the payout. Now we know that x equals 2 to the n, so instead of writing 2 to the n in our probability equation, we can just write x. So we end up with this. The probability of a payout of x dollars is equal to 1 over x, or in other words, x to the power of -1.
You put them together, the exponentials conspire to make a power law. And that's a very common thing in nature, that a lot of times when we see power laws, there are 2 underlying exponentials that are dancing together to make a power law.
One example of this is earthquakes. If you look at data on earthquakes, you find that small earthquakes are very common, but earthquakes of increasing magnitudes become exponentially rarer.
That's why it's a
But
log.
the destruction that earthquakes cause is not proportional to their magnitude. It's proportional to the energy they release. And as earthquakes grow in magnitude, that energy grows exponentially.
So there's this exponential decay in frequency of earthquakes of a given magnitude, and an exponential increase in the amount of energy released by earthquakes of a certain magnitude. So when you combine those two exponentials,
You get a power law.
to eliminate the magnitude, what you find is a power law.
But power laws also reveal something deeper about the underlying structure of a system. To see this in action, let's go back to the third coin game and the St. Petersburg paradox. Now you can draw all the different outcomes as a tree diagram, where the length of each branch is equal to its probability. So starting with a single line of length 1, and then...
I get it. That's why the news are always dog shit, because they found a power law. Somebody does something atrocious, it's a dead outlier, and it's wow.
a half for the first 2 branches, a quarter for the next 4, and so on. Now, when you zoom in, you keep seeing the same structure repeating at smaller and smaller scales. It's self-similar, like a fractal. And that's no coincidence. We see the same fractal-like pattern in the veins on a leaf, river networks, the blood vessels in our lungs, even lightning. And in all of these cases, we can describe the pattern with a power law. Power laws and fractals are intrinsically linked. That's because power laws reveal something fundamental about a system's structure.
So I've got a magnet and I've got a screw. And you'll notice if I bring them close together, then the screw gets attracted to the magnet. And that's because there's a lot of iron in it, which is ferromagnetic. But watch what happens if I start heating this up. Trying to, oh. You see that? Ah, there it went. There it went. You see, you heat it up and suddenly it becomes non-magnetic. To find out what happened, let's zoom in on this magnet.
It expands.
Inside a magnet, each atom has its
Or it
own
moves.
magnetic moment, which means you can think of it like its own little magnet or compass. If one atom's moment points up, its neighbors tend to point that way too, since this lowers the system's overall potential energy. Therefore, at low temperatures, you get large regions called domains where all the moments align. And when many of these domains also align, their individual magnetic fields reinforce to create an overall field around the magnet. But if you heat up the magnet, each atom starts vibrating vigorously.
What? Bro, when is that was reacting? When is that was reacting to this video? Bro, yo, Yuggy, how about you make your own fucking content, you fucking bitch? Bro's in the fucking chat talking shit about what I do. How about you go live every once in a while?
moments flip up and down, and so the alignment can break down. And when all the moments cancel out, then there's no longer a net magnetic field. Now, if you have the right equipment, you can balance any magnetic material right on that transition point, right between magnetic and non-magnetic. This is called the critical point, and it occurs at a specific temperature called the Curie temperature. I asked Casper and the team to build a simulation to show what's going on inside the magnet at this critical point.
Each pixel represents the magnetic moment of an individual atom. Let's say red is up and blue is down. Now, when the temperature is low, we get these big domains where the magnetic moments are all aligned, and you get an overall magnetic field. But if we
guys, it's like the TikTok with the fucking with the rock paper scissors, where they go around and they start gangs, and then once they flip, everybody flips.
Really crank up the temperature, then all of these moments start flipping up and down, and so they cancel out, and the magnet loses its magnetism. So that's exactly what happened in our demo. But if we tune the temperature just right to that Curie temperature, then the pattern becomes way more interesting.
This looks like a map.
Like a map?
Yeah, it almost looks like the Mediterranean or something. It's almost stable. Like, atoms that are pointing one way tend to point that way for a while, but there's clearly fluctuations as well, so domains are constantly coming and going. It's both got some elements of stability and some persistence over time, some features which are consistent, but it's also not locked in place.
Right.
Because you notice changes over time.
If you zoom in, you find that the same kinds of...
I'm not watching the rest of this video. I'm not watching the rest of this. I'm sorry. I'm not fucking doing shit. It gets to a point where I feel like we can get to the overall gist of the video without the empirical experiments that go into mathematics and shit, and it's like, bruh. I like it though. I like the video. It's just stuff for me.